Hi everyone, and welcome to the 19th Daily Critique, where I'm going to be going through 5 images by James Lane. They're all of Scotland, and you guys have really been spoiling me in this last week or so because we've got more great images here. I did notice one of them was a bit of an odd one out when it came to the edits, so I'm going to briefly mention having some consistency in your edits to create a body of work as opposed to just editing randomly specifically to each photograph. But aside from that, general critique and general appreciation of James's work, because there's some really nice shots here. So let's get going. These are the 5 images that James sent in. So as usual, we're going to hop into Photoshop here and go through them one by one. So we'll start with this one of Ben A. I think this was taken not far from Kinloch U. So this is an area I know moderately well, and really beautiful scene. Great to have the autumn colour combined with snow on the peaks, which certainly doesn't happen every year. To get snow up here on Ben A is wonderful, and I think the way this has been shot is brilliant too, because you have these distinct layers, all fairly equal, running through the image, and what I really like is the rich saturation of the autumnal colour at the bottom, and then going into a moderately rich grass brown there, with the winter colours creeping into the grasses, and then a scree slope which has some browns in, and then you're finally drifting into the black and whites of the snow on the crags and the sky. So there's this gradual transition to desaturation, which is quite interesting from a colour standpoint. And these warm colours do come forward nicely, which is good, because you've got a very compressed landscape here. It's shot at a moderate focal length. I'm guessing this is in excess of 70 millimeters. That's all great. I'm not so sure about these out of focus leaves at the front here. I mean, they're not that distracting, but they certainly don't add anything. Perhaps that was just more of a technical limitation, because James actually shot this on a GFX 50R, which is a camera I'd love to get my hands on. I can tell you the file quality of these images is really beautiful. Really good start there, and of course clear focal point, this central tree and the central mountain. So this is a good example of how you can use symmetry effectively in a photograph. And you know, where's the rule of thirds here? It's completely absent, and for me this works really well. I will just have a look quickly at the color channels and just see if we've got any clipping of the channels, and certainly not. If we do, it's the red channel. So I'll just have a look at the curves here, and so actually this has been handled very well, but this might fit into what I'm going to discuss in a second. So now we've got a image of, I think, Scots pine here in the mist, and you can see the warm colours of what I assume is dawn creeping into the top of the frame here, looking through the mist to a mountainside with that diagonal just subtly visible through the mist, and these wonderful silhouettes of the trees which have been perfectly separated. So this is a good example of execution of a compositional concept, which is to try to keep your subjects separated if you can, and that's particularly true of silhouettes. You wouldn't want these two trees, for example, bleeding into one another, but I mean, even here you can see the trunk runs perfectly between a group of trees on the right and a group of trees on the left. I mean, every tree here is separate, and I can't imagine that that's a fluke. Again, central composition, impactful, lots of breathing space, so it gives a really nice, airy, peaceful feel to the image. That space is absolutely essential. Somebody who was maybe less experienced or had less of an idea or a natural feel for composition might be tempted to come in a bit closer and put these two trees composed in thirds like this, and by getting closer and lower you could possibly get the tree up so that you could effectively have this same background but with the trees on thirds, for example. But I think this way of composing the image is much nicer, because firstly it's further back, so you've got all that lovely space, and the central placement of the tree I think is very effective here. So absolutely love that image, and I love the restraint of the processing as well. Very subtle hues coming through, just a slight blue to the mist below this point, and just a slight warmth to the mist above that point. So really, really lovely image. One of the best that I've looked at whilst doing these critiques. This is a great portrait of trees. It's silver birch we're looking at here, which are one of the few tree species that are fairly prolific this far north in Scotland, and you can see them in various stages of losing their leaves. These trees are really fantastic to shoot throughout the seasons, and they have this incredible structure, much like the aspens in America. And of course the mist gives this great depth to the image, and it helps separate the trees from the background. So as I'm sure many of you will already be aware, really if you want to get images of trees that have a good sense of depth and separate the trees from whatever backdrop they have, you do need that mist, and this is just the perfect level to allow what's behind to show through subtly, but you still have that great separation. And compositionally it's pretty well handled here. You've got two strong trees in the foreground, and this one, which I guess is kind of a nice does a nice job filling in a gap and has just enough space to the edge of the frame to fit within the composition. And again, a really subtle edit. All those natural hues are coming through beautifully. You can see a full range of yellows and oranges all creeping through a slightly blue mist, and that blue in the mist again helps to create that color separation. So another really brilliant edit there to go with the composition, which is very effective. I will just hop into Lightroom here to show you the raw file, because this was originally shot in portrait, and I think it was a very good decision to crop this image because of this imbalance you have in the foreground here. So I think you have to crop at least up to this line. So if I just do that very quickly. I always forget to unlock that padlock there. And as you crop up, that of course creates imbalance between the foreground and the sky. So then you have to crop down. So there's kind of an iterative process here that lends you to this particular crop. And then on to our fourth image. Now this one, to be honest, doesn't do that much for me. But what it does do is achieve a really great sense of the wildness and inhospitability of the mountains in Scotland in the winter. I think there's a layering concept going on here with this foreground hillside and then another creeping in, and then the mountain peak in the back there. But I don't think it quite has the geometry that I would want, nor the number of layers to really pull off that concept. And I'm kind of left staring into space somewhat with this shape right in the middle of the frame. So for me, this one doesn't quite work, but I do think that it's, again, well handled, well edited, understated, and effective at generating that sense of atmosphere. So although it wouldn't be what I would shoot personally, I think it's a very good execution of potentially James's idea to capture images that reflect the season and the weather he was experiencing at the time. Okay, and finally onto our odd one out of the day. So aside from this being a coastal image, there's one stark difference between this shot and the rest, and that's how it's edited. So here we have a much richer, more saturated, more contrasty, more dramatic edit of this scene. And for me, this really doesn't tie in with the rest of James's work at all. It looks like a completely different photographer shot it, albeit the eye for composition shines through here, because it's again a really nice example of layers and spacing, and actually not following the compositional rules again. I mean, putting your subject relatively close to the bottom of the frame but with just enough space there to let it breathe, and then this strong sense of horizontal lines running all the way through the image, pretty much everywhere you look. I think it's very, very effective compositionally, and I like the shutter speed used for the waves here. I think that's fairly evocative too. And you've got this column of rain pouring down that's being lit, I assume, by a sunset or sunrise. Yeah, so there's a lot to love about the image, but what I don't love is how it fits in with the other shots, and in fact, generally I find it a bit oversaturated. So if I just show you all of James's images together here, you can see that this first shot actually doesn't fit as well with these three, because there is that little bit more saturation. So maybe I would say to James, if this was your entire portfolio, then even this shot, perhaps you could just tone back that saturation very, very slightly. Because if we look at one of his original raw files here, you can see there is a little bit less color, and you could just be very careful there in just dialing it back the tiniest bit, and just reducing that contrast a tiny bit, just to get it to fit in with the rest of the set, so to speak. Because of course I think these two in particular work brilliantly together, but even the third image fits together well, just because the processing has been handled in a similar way, very subtle and understated. But it is this last image that really sticks out to me, and so I would re-edit that to something like this, so you can see just how drastically I have changed the edit, really. And there's I mean, really every aspect of this image has too much color, and I can understand the temptation to do that. I'm just thinking, is this my edit or is it the original? No, it is my edit. So I mean, don't pay too much attention to what I've done here. I've even taken some color out, actually, but I've added a fair amount of contrast effectively, and set a white point with a tone curve, which I occasionally do. But rather than discussing what I've done with the edit, I think it's just worth discussing why this fits in better as a set, because to me the palette and the approach to processing is much better, and actually I think it needs a slightly cooler white balance, and let a little bit more saturation back in. Yeah, so that would be my only major critique, if you like, for James. It's just that I find these other images so beautiful that I want to see this fifth image fit in with the set, and it's a really good concept to take hold of if you are a photographer looking to push his work to the next level. You can't just have a mishmash of processing styles and content, and you need to decide what your vision is, what your direction is, and try to create coherent work that fits together and tells the story of you as a photographer or a place in general. This one shot approach that the likes of Facebook and Instagram tempt you into is not necessarily the best if you want to create a nice body of work. So James, thank you very much for those. I don't want to play favourites too much, but I think those are my favourite landscape images that I've edited so far as part of this series. So thank you for sending those in.